We have a new sponsor on the podcast, folks. It's QUANT Wrestling. Super pleased to be working with these folks. They provide analytics on the sport of wrestling, something that's desperately needed in our great sport. QUANT does this by tracking over 550 analytics throughout a match and can provide different outcomes such as how long between the time a guy shoots to when he finishes. How often does David Carr start a period on top and end a period on top? QUANT can also predict with 82% accuracy match outcomes at the Division I level. You can see all of this data in the QUANT app, which is available in the Apple App Store as well as the Google Play Store. There are two versions of the app. The Division I app, where QUANT is tracking all of their data points on Division I wrestlers on your behalf. Then they also have a youth and high school app where parents and wrestlers watch their matches and input the data into the QUANT app, and QUANT does all the analytics on the back end. The QUANT Wrestling apps are available in the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. That's QUANT, Q-U-A-N-T, Q-U-A-N-T. The first 2 weeks are free, but if you use the discount code WCML, you'll get an additional 2 weeks for free. That's QUANT Wrestling, a new sponsor here on Wrestling Changed My Life. Now let's get to the show.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestled, because if you wrestled, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
You know, if I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast, presented by QUANT Wrestling. Download the QUANT app now in the Apple and Google Play stores and use the compare feature to predict match outcomes for this weekend's Cliff Keen tournament in Las Vegas. Okay, folks, our guest today is Mr. Bill Zimmerman, Mr. Z, as he's known to his guys, 90 years old. He's joined by three of his former wrestlers, and we talk about the impact Mr. Z had on his program and his wrestlers over the years, which anyone you talk to about this guy just speaks volumes about his leadership and his personality and how much he gave back. And actually, some of his wrestlers started a scholarship. Mike Gretz started a scholarship in Mr. Z's honor, and it's raised almost $100,000, and that's going to go to wrestlers in need in the school district where Mr. Z taught. Fan of the Week goes to the man who made this interview happen, Dave Halpern, founder, president, CEO, whatever you want to call it, of the Halpern Law Firm based out of Philadelphia. Dave, thank you so much for the support. Greatly appreciate it. Now let's get to the interview with the great Mr. Z. All right, ladies and gentlemen, special episode of the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast. We have a conglomerate of PA wrestlers on here, and really why we're here is to talk about a gentleman by the name of Mr. Z, Coach Z, as he's called. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Yes, and we're joined by a number of your former wrestlers who have started a scholarship in your name, a little bit in part influence from this show. So we're just so touched that, wrestlers are going to be getting financial support in the name and honor of Mr. Z. So let's just start with the one and only William Zimmerman. I noticed that you wrestled in the state tournament in Pennsylvania in 1950, went on to wrestle in college in 1954. Tell me about the Pennsylvania state tournament in the 50s and what it was like back then.
Well, I was district champ, and I wasn't scored on in the high school. Abington High School wrestling 145, and so we drove out to Pittsburgh, let's see, where we're Washington County, which would have been Washington Jefferson College. And so we were driven out. There was 3 of us that qualified to go to the States. And of course, I won 2 and lost 2. And it was a tremendous experience for me. I'd never been that far in the state of Pennsylvania, but we had a good team at Abington, and the states were tough. I mean, most of it was people from Allegheny that were winning at that point, and they're probably still winning pretty much. And so that was my experience for the states in 1950, my senior year. And then I was going to be a carpenter. I had already apprenticeship to do that. And what happened was, one of my best buddies on the wrestling team was Charlie Weber, who also was a great football player. I played football too for Killinger at Westchester. And he said, Zimmy called me up. He said, Dr. Trezise needs a 145-pounder. He said, you got to come out here. I said, look, I can't get time off. I think they might fire me if I took time off. So I talked to the boss. He said, you can have 1 day. So I said, I'll go to Abington High School and get my credentials. So I went up and saw the principal, and had 2 people came in, wrote that letters of recommendation, and then got it all together and drove out to Westchester and talked to the registrar and talked to the wrestling coach. And I got into Westchester that same day. So
wow,
that was my experience. You don't get in that way anymore.
What was a bigger turning point, joining the Marines or going to Westchester?
Well, I think the big turning point was going to Westchester, because I never probably would have joined. I probably would have been inducted into the Army at that point. But the interesting thing was that, so I wrestled 4 years, and then I went to the Nationals. Okay, three people were set. 3 of us were pretty good at that time at Westchester, and they promised us to go. And then all of a sudden, the administration changed their mind. So the kids struck. They said, we're not going to class until you send those guys to the Nationals. So they did. Wow. They said to us, you're going to pay for this. Anything that we spend on your flight and back, you're going to pay. So of course we didn't pay. And I'm the only one that won anything. I won 2 and lost 2 there. And but that was a big change. Then so since I was at Westchester, I wanted to go to Penn State and get a master's degree. So I talked to the dean of men and football coach I think I wrote his name down here. Great guy from Penn State, Killinger. So Killinger wrote me a recommendation. He was kind of a boisterous guy. He said, you're in Penn State, because I went there. So that happened. I went to Penn State, and I helped out with the freshman team. And then I had to make a decision. Where are you going to go? You're going to go in the Army, or you're going to go in the Marine Corps? And there was a recruiter right on Penn State. I joined the Marine Corps to go to OCS at Penn State, and went there that next year and was there for 3 years. Then I wrestled in the Marine Corps. And I helped out coaching out there. And then wrestling helped me, because I wouldn't have gone to college if I wasn't a wrestler. And then, of course, I wouldn't have gone to Penn State and learned and joined the Marine Corps. And Marine Corps changed my life, too, because of wrestling. And then when I got out of the Marine Corps, I sent my recommendation to all these people around the area. I could have gone to teach at where I grew up at Abington, Cheltenham, and Lower Merion gave me an opportunity. So I went over to see the dean of men there, and he said, there's no opening, but said next year we need another wrestling coach, and you're qualified. Looked at the record, went to states, I went to the Nationals. And so that's how I got the teaching job finally at Harriton High School, and then became the wrestling coach.
And when you were at Penn State, was the great Bill Cole at Penn State when you were there?
Who?
Bill Cole. Was he the head coach at Penn State?
No, the head coach was Charles Spidell.
Charles
Spidell was he had great teams, and so he just won I think he won the championship the year before. I think he won in 52 or 53. I was out there in 1954, it would have been. And so I met him there, and I talked to him, and he said, well, if you get into Penn State, he said, you're going to help me with Coach Rush, you help with the freshman team. And that's what happened. And so wrestling helped me there. And then, of course, wrestling helped me get the job at Lower Merion. So it's true.
Wow. And then the dynasty at at Harriton High School begins. Now, Mike, when you were wrestling for Coach Z, one of the concepts that I've heard is, the concept of total preparation, and that was learned during the Marine Corps. But Mike, how did you see that manifest in your day-to-day trainings and the philosophy that brought to the program?
Well, we're talking about one of the greatest people I've ever come across. Bill Zimmerman is a remarkable guy. Leadership's a key word, and preparation. I look at it as all the shuns, if you will. There's preparation, there's motivation, inspiration, passion. But one of the things Z did, and I think that a lot of that came from the Marine Corps. I can talk about the drilling and the cardio work we did every day. Drills were a part of our lives. But what Z did with all the shuns, the preparation, inspiration, motivation, passion, is he gave us purpose. So all of that really needs somebody to define what is it we're trying to do. And the Marine Corps probably does it, better than anybody else. You know what your job is, right? So
right.
Z, he's wired a certain way. So I think the Marine Corps just found the perfect Marine. There's a guy that went in already a leader, but the Marine Corps refined him and told him the disciplines of what it took. Z really applied that every day in a practice room where, it brought order to a chaotic situation. A lot of high school kids, some wrestlers, some bad, some just learning. Z dealt with them all, and he dealt with a way, winning was without a question. It was the purpose. You were there to win. But Z would also, keep it humble. If you started smelling yourself in that wrestling room, he'd be working with you, and that cross face might have a little extra mustard, and you're going to realize, I may think I'm good, but that guy is a lot better, and you learn to be humble.
You hit on something I freaking love, though, when it comes to wrestling and what it does. It gives kids purpose. And you think about how many kids now go to high school. I live across the street from a high school. You talk to these kids, they don't have a purpose. They don't know what they're doing in life, what their goals are. And so that's something that you saw come through right away.
Ryan, I think the keys that we talk about with Coach Zimmerman, we look at it. I'm almost 50 years away from the last practice I had with Bill Zimmerman. And the lessons I learned then are just as relevant today as they were 50 years ago, maybe more so. And purpose is certainly a word that I would say at 66 years old, I still really value the lessons that he told me and taught us about having purpose in your life. And I think that's a real key thing. And your point today about the young people, purpose is certainly relevant.
And Mr. Z, I had read that, during the 80s, the school district you were coaching in passed a rule that if you had below a C average, you couldn't compete. And you talk about kids needing purpose. Who needs it more than those kids who are not up to speed in academics? So talk about that implication of not allowing kids below a C average to compete and how you guys countered that.
Yeah, well, first of all, Michael's exactly right. I changed in the Marine Corps too. I mean, we worked hard. And so in the Marine Corps, I just transferred that to making my guys work hard. And that benefited all of us because I was working hard with them because I used to work out a lot with them. And I thought that was important. But they sent this thing out and they passed it. They said, you got to have a C average to be out for sports. And I said to myself, that's ridiculous. You can graduate with a D average. And you can go to anything else. You can be in the soccer club. You can be in the play. And so we had a lot of people. It was a wild meeting, and we had a lot of people standing up and said, "That's ridiculous. You can't do that." So they changed the way because for me, I spent a lot of time going to teachers and saying, "Can you help this gentleman? He needs to get up a little bit. I want him eligible." And most of the teachers actually would help a lot, and they helped a lot of kids continue to wrestle and to continue to be successful by just giving them extra credit work.
Wow. And so eventually was it overturned or is that still in
It was
place
overturned
today?
that same, we came in to protest it. They did it that same night.
Wow.
It was overwhelming. Yeah, because it was kind of ridiculous when you think about it, making only the athletes in the school get the average. You could do anything else in the school, plays and anything else. You go on field trips, doesn't matter. But they change it. They change it back to you have to just be passing. Which was a D average was enough to wrestle. And I'll have to tell you, I had a lot of guys that's why they wrestled, because they at least had a D average. They wouldn't have wrestled otherwise.
Yeah, think about that. I mean, on its face, it sounds like a good idea, but really you think about, the kind of implications of that. It's like leaving the kids behind who need it the most.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Wow. And so when you look at, your career and some of the battles you've had, I'm not a PA guy, I'll admit it. So I'm not familiar with this program, but I've heard that the word Sun Valley strikes quite a chord amongst this group. Tom, talk us through some of your memories of those battles back in the day.
Well, sure. I guess let's begin with my memories were the teams prior to my team were much better at beating Sun Valley than my team was. I think we got in my senior year, but I think from freshman, sophomore, junior year, they always got the best of us. Listen, it was a high school rivalry. There was a lot of rah-rah. There was a lot of preparation for that match, and a lot of excitement around it. Maybe it's from the Marine Corps, or maybe it's just built into Mr. Zimmerman, but he prepared us like we were Marine recruits. The one thing I can say, honestly, I felt like, the one thing Harriton had was we were always ready. We were always in shape. You never saw us gassing on the mat. And, the Sun Valley rivalry aside, we were always a prepared wrestling team to go to the mat and give it, the full 6 minutes. And I credit Mr. Zimmerman and, his workout regimen with that. Unfortunately, it didn't play to my favor while we were wrestling Sun Valley. I know some of the guys on here have much better war stories when it comes to Sun Valley than we do.
I think the preparation, though, is key, though, right? Because that's something that even for this podcast, I think the differentiator is the prep work that goes in. And any of you folks who've been successful in business knows that that's everything. So is that something you've taken through your career?
100%. My son was a wrestler, and I used to tell him 90% of what you're going to get from wrestling has nothing to do with win or loss. It has everything to do with how hard you practice, how hard you prepare. Mm-hmm. If there's one refrain that's been consistent throughout my life that I took from wrestling, it's chain wrestling. And I learned that from Mr. Z, and I apply that into my business life nearly every day. And when I think of chain wrestling, I think of you just keep hitting your move till you score points. Doesn't matter if you hit your move and you fail and they sprawl and they cross face you, they get behind you, just keep chain wrestling. And that's something that has been thematic to everything I do, most particularly business. I chain wrestle in everything I do.
It's such a good point.
Yes.
Does that come back to you, Mr. Z, that concept?
Oh, absolutely. Do it. We were talking about before, preparation is the key, and we worked hard on that. And the old saying was preparation is the key to victory and success, and we did that. And I worked the kids hard, and they were willing to work, and that worked out well. And we kept doing the same holds over and over again. Cross face cradle, side cradle, reverse cradle, and put chains together with. He's absolutely right.
And Bill, when you think back to some of your lessons learned, one of the notes I keep getting here is master motivator, and motivation in our day and age. My library is filled with self-help books. So I'm probably the worst example of this, but motivation is so fleeting, and it's so can be a cheesy concept, but when it's endearing and true, like it seems to be with Mr. Z, it obviously can go a long way. What comes to mind for you when you think about techniques and philosophies to motivate kids that were used?
Well, he had these sayings that were repeated. They were on the wall. You saw them every day. There's a poem, I Can. I don't know who wrote it. I probably read that twice a day, every day for 8 months a year for 3 years. And I can still recite it by heart, although I haven't heard it in God knows how long. But it was called I Can, and it was just a positive, if you think you can do it, you can do it. Mr. Z's fear no one, respect all is something that I still carry with me. I'm a trial lawyer, and sometimes I'm against very, very highly skilled trial lawyers and sometimes not so skilled trial lawyers, but I fear none of them. And I do respect them all. And part of respecting everyone is preparing to do your best, right? And Mr. Z drilled that into us to prepare. And the thing is, he was such a nice combination of like military drill sergeant with like a funny, warm bent, if that makes any sense. So it wasn't like he was yelling at us or mean to us. He was driving us to be the best that we could be. And I think you have a collection of guys on here who were the best that they could be.
Yes.
I loved it.
And when you think about, the lessons learned, it sounds like it was more than just wrestling. It was more like life lessons and like father figure type lessons distilled.
Very much so. Very much.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Z, tell me about the community of the kids you were drawing from. Was it affluent or was it inner city type of a situation?
No, you had affluent young men, and you had men that weren't affluent, but they all came together and worked together, and it worked out well. Now, you have to understand that we had a small wrestling room, and what I tried to do when I first got involved was to make wrestling part of their life all the time. So I ran the recreation department in my hometown, which was Plymouth Meeting, and we had a tournament there, and we had a tournament at Harriton each year, and we had all kinds of opportunities to wrestle, and we kept them going, kept them wrestling, sent them information about wrestling, tried to get wrestling on their mind, and they're interested in it. And a lot of them did a great job of doing it, and I contribute a lot to their parents. And the assistant coach, the head coach at Welsh Valley, West Dowdy, did a great job starting the kids, and we picked them up and continued to push them and drill them and so forth. But the parents were always helpful. They would pay for kids to go to clinics, to go to camp, and they would make all these awards. Had no trouble giving many awards because the parents were right there paying for things. So the parents did a great job, and the administration was also very helpful. But if you look at the whole thing, it was the kids who bought the information and just worked hard and tried to be the best they could be.
And you hit on two things that I think are key in program building. Everyone can agree that a strong parental team is huge. Obviously an AD that likes wrestling or at least supports it. But outside of that, when you look at the state of wrestling, the state of coaching now, what are some things you're seeing coaches do that you think maybe misplaced or a mistake that maybe you would ward against just based on your experience? Anything that jumps out to you?
Well, what I would see sometimes, some of the coaches would scream and holler at the boy when they lost. I mean, they gave their all, but they lost, or maybe they made a mistake, and I never did that. I mean, I gave it credit for the guys who were out there doing their best to win. And, we emphasized, and we won a lot of matches like this, emphasized pinning. I mean, it's not just important to win, it's important to pin for the team. So with 12 matches, a lot of times we won because we had pins. The other team won more matches, but they didn't pin. So we emphasized that. And sometimes the coaches would yell at them. And I know I won't mention any names. And we used to go to scrimmage a lot of teams, before the season started. And a couple of them would swear, call the kids all kind of names. And our guy was like, "Can you believe that, coach? How can you get away with calling those kids those bad names?"
Isn't that crazy? Like, you think about what kind of environment's good for employees. It's like certainly not one like that,
No, not at all. But some of them did that, and we didn't do that. And I always felt that most of them gave their full effort, and that's all you can ask for. Sometimes the guys are more skilled, stronger, and so forth. I can remember myself. I wrestled a guy in the Nationals, and I would have moved on to third, and the guy's name was Tempest. And I was strong. I could do a lot of chins and all that. He grabbed my hand. I couldn't get my hand loose. I couldn't get loose. And I got tuned. My worst beating was in that last match I wrestled at the Nationals. And he went on to be next year. He lost closely to a guy named Hoke in the finals. But the next year he was a national champion. I think he was from Illinois or Wisconsin.
So that's something you've kept in mind in terms of
yes,
measuring effort versus outcome.
Yes, and be as strong as you can be, because I always remember a guy grabbing me and I couldn't get loose. Well, this is going to be a bad day for me.
One thing I wanted to ask you about before we get into the scholarship is I read that, every September you would mail out goals for the season. Talk us through that and kind of where you got that idea and what you would detail out in those goals.
Well, most of the sayings I picked up from somebody else. I can't tell you. I don't have too many original ideas in my head. Most of my stuff is stolen. And what I would do, I thought that was a good idea. I forget. It may have been Spidell. That's the former Penn State coach. It may have been Swartz at Navy, because as a kid, I would go down I could walk to Cheltenham High School. It was about 3 blocks, but I lived on the other side of the line. I went to Abington. I could walk to Cheltenham High School, and a guy would come in. He was Naval Academy coach. He put a wrestling clinic on at Cheltenham High School, and I'd walk down and join it. I'd always tell him, I'm not from Cheltenham, but do you mind if I come in? Coach always let me in, and maybe that fellow, I don't know, somebody gave me the idea. It was not an original idea. We used it, and it kept the kids thinking about wrestling, and thinking about being as good as they could be, and we worked at that, and it was successful.
Yeah, just the concept of having goals is so important, something to strive towards. And, unfortunately, a lot of kids maybe aren't in the situation where they even had exposure to a legendary coach such as yourself. And so what you guys are doing now through this scholarship is trying to broaden the application of the great sport of wrestling. Mike, talk us through how this scholarship came to be and kind of where it's at now.
Well, I think that I'm not sure what the genesis of the idea of the scholarship, but the idea of honoring Z has always been there for all of us. I don't speak for myself. I think that one of the things that's been apparent here is that when we talk about this idea to any number of wrestlers that have been under Z's tutelage in the past, 100% say, I'm in. And one of the reasons that it's so perfect is that this is a great way to honor the legacy of Bill Zimmerman, who did value education. You had to be doing your homework as well as your wrestling work. He expected you to do your best everywhere. And I think that you asked about the environment that we're up in. Lower Merion's not known to be a poor area. But there are poor families, and there are a lot of people that have financial aid. And even today, there's a lot of kids that would not be going to college if they didn't have financial aid from Lower Merion and Harriton as well. That's a fact. And this Lower Merion Scholarship Fund has been in place since 1960, I think it is. And so here's a great way to honor this great coach and great teacher. And the Scholarship Fund has done something unprecedented for Bill Zimmerman. And it's really exciting that what they've done is to establish a 50-year scholarship. So every year for 50 years, a student, preferably a wrestler, but always somebody in financial need. And if there's not a wrestler with financial need, it'll go to somebody in the general population of Harriton that exhibits his spirit, right? So very key thing. So 50 years from now, and every year for 50 years, and every year of their college, they get $1,000. It's $4,000 per student. The great news is, Ryan, we started off just creating one. We had such a high, great interest in guys like Tom Remillard and Dave and Scott and Billy, all paying in. We are now approaching a second scholarship that we will have 2 scholarships every year for 50 years.
Wow.
$1,000 a year for each student. That's $400,000 that will be paid out. And more importantly, think about this, Ryan, that when Bill Zimmerman started coaching in 1961, to the final year of the payout 50 years from now will have been 115 years that Bill Zimmerman has directly and positively impacted the life of wrestlers and students at Harriton High School.
Wow.
Really remarkable legacy for a
wow.
Man, so
That's great.
Really, really proud to have done this, but really, it's only because all these wrestlers came together and said, "I'm in." 100% said, "I'm in." Zimmerman.
That's just amazing. You get chills hearing that because, this is all just wrestlers here getting together. Tom, I know you're one of the smiling faces right now. What do you, what kind of feelings does that evoke when you hear that kind of a financial commitment?
Well, first off, my thanks go out to Dave and Mike for helping put this together and for calling my attention to it. The smile is because, Mr. Z was like a father figure to me. He wasn't, the type of coach that yelled and screamed and got into your face. He wasn't the type of coach that yelled and screamed and got into the ref's face on the mat. He led by example. And his example to me was one of hard work pays off, conducting yourself in, a professional manner, leaving it on the mat, all the sort of high bars that you want kids to strive for, Mr. Z exemplified. I told him once, several years ago, when there was a ceremony at the high school, for so many years, he was the voice on my shoulder that, whispered to me, this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing to do. The fact that that influence is going to be spread out for decades to come is something I'm very, very, very proud to be a part of, and could not find a better way to honor Mr. Z and all that he's done for me in my life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's powerful. And I love, just how far reaching it is. And even Bill, as you mentioned, you're in the shark infested waters of trial attorneys, and, you're getting your elbows dirty every day. And so, firsthand that these lessons are fire tested. Like, it's not just, they're going to work at the high school regional. They're going to work in some of the most competitive circles. Is that something you've seen come true, Bill?
I think 100%. It is those lessons, intestinal fortitude, when I'm just exhausted and I'm trying to get ready for a trial. And it's sort of, it's hard to get ready. Once you're in the arena, your adrenaline takes over, and, a week's trial goes by in a flash, but the getting ready is tough. And I feel myself tiring. I remember Mr. Z, intestinal fortitude. You got to keep going. And the lessons that we all learn, Mike was saying all these guys were so eager to contribute. I have to say, I got in touch with people that I had not spoken to in some cases 35, 40 years. And I didn't get, I'm calling them out of the blue. And I didn't get any further than to say, we're starting a scholarship for Mr. Z. Then everybody I spoke to was like, I'm in. What are we doing? Everybody. I mean, that's the impact this man has had on our lives. It's just been incredible. And I still remember the lessons. I still feel Mr. Z and his spirit in me. And I thank you, Coach.
You're welcome.
Mr. Z, let's wind down with you, sir, because, as much as, we interview folks who have won Olympic medals, we've had Russians on here, everything, but I love having the grassroots teachers, because that's where you make the biggest difference. Everyone can remember their middle school coach or their high school coach. I'm sure you can as well. But when you look back at the sport, wrestling, and being an educator and being a coach, like, how has it shaped and impacted your life when you look back on it?
Well, my life has changed so much. And I started out with, I was in Abingdon Junior High School, and a fellow named Zecor, not Zecor, that was the other fellow, a fellow named, I wrote his name down so I remembered, Metriff. He started a team, and we had 4 matches. And I went out because I was a very active guy. And then, I went to the high school, and I had my older brother wrestled a bit, but he got tired of wrestling. He wanted to buy cars, so he quit. But it was everything that had sort of happened along the way was helped me because I was a wrestler. I would have been a builder. Maybe I would have been it changed because of one guy calling me up, Charlie Weber, the former Eagles great. he called me up and said, we need a guy there. And I said, okay. I said, if I can get in one day, I'm going to come. Well, that's what happened. I got in one day. Then I went to Penn State, and the football coach, he's the one who wrote me a good recommendation. I got there and got that job. Then I went to the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps taught me like hard work, just go all the time. And that's what we tried to do. The guys know if I was a phys ed teacher and we did calisthenics before every class, I still do those 15 minutes of calisthenics every night. Every night. And I make sure I walk a mile every day. And I got bad knees. I have no cartilage in either knee. I get my knees drained every 3 months, and they give me all different kinds of things, and it helps out some, but doesn't do it. But I keep plugging, and that's what you got to do in life. I mean, I'm 80, what am I, 89? And I'm doctors, and God has kept me alive, and I know exercise has too. So I still push and struggle, and it's been a wonderful experience for me.
Mr. Z, you're an animal.
Well, possibly. And the parents, the kids have been wonderful.
You've been wonderful to us, Mr. Z.
We love you, Mr. Z.
Amazing man.
Beautiful. Great way to wind this down, gentlemen. Mike, I know Mike, Tom, and Bill, and Mr. Z, thank you all so much for taking the time today. We'll go around the horn. Any last words? Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, Ryan, you touched on something. We're here talking about Coach Zimmerman, and we're talking about the scholarship and how important it is. One of the things that this is meant to do is make people understand. You know, here we are, for myself personally, 66 years ago. I spent 3 years, less than 5% of my life right now, with that man right there. And I still talk about it 50 years later as the most inspirational people of my life. So what we have to do is get more Bill Zimmermans in this world to understand that's the impact you can have on people, even though it's only 3 years. It is a very impressionable time, and you're changing people's lives for the better. And that's what Bill Zimmerman did. And hopefully we get other people that understand that's the impact you have. You can get into teaching and make a difference in people's lives. Zimmerman dedicated himself for those 3 years to me and to every teammate and every student, and he did it year after year after year. I love Bill, and it was an amazing person in my life. I'm so grateful for that experience. I would not be who I am today without him. So thanks, Z.
Thank you, Mike.
Tom?
Mr. Z, you are one of my favorite people on this planet, and that's very elite designation because there's only 4 other people that I'd be able to say that about. Thank you. Thank you for teaching me that effort equals result. The harder you work towards something, the better your result. It's that simple. There's no magic. There's no potion. It's all about what you put in is what you're going to get out. If I walked away from one lesson and all the years I spent with you, that's the preeminent one that stays with me every day. And thank you. Thank you so much for teaching me that.
You're welcome. Thank you, Tom. Well, you're easy to teach, and most of these guys also played badminton. Most of these guys also were involved with the Marine Corps fitness team that we always were involved in, and they all worked hard, and I'm very proud of them.
Bill Pincus, last one with you, my friend.
Well, it's unquestionable that wrestling and Mr. Z changed my life. I was a 105-pound flea. I had a little bit of talent at wrestling and no hard work in me. I had a pretty soft life. And Mr. Z got me going. And like Tom says, he made me understand the value of hard work and preparation to achieve whatever you want to achieve. And I grew bigger, but I also grew as a person under him. And like Mike says, I mean, this is 45 years ago, and we still, all of us, and not just us 3, And not just Dave and Scott. There are so many of us that feel him as a continual present influence and motivator in our lives. And I don't know what greater testament there could be. You know, if there's that movie, Richard Holland's Opus, well, we are Bill Zimmerman's Opus.
Well, thank you, Billy. Well, these guys were easy. These guys were easy to teach. They wanted it, and they worked hard, and you didn't have to push them too hard because they wanted to be the best they could be.
Well, I love it, and I just love having all you guys here together. Wrestling guys coming together to help other people, and obviously everyone on this call is achieving some success in life and is still leading a purpose-driven life, and that's a great thing to see, because there's nothing worse than seeing someone who doesn't have that direction. You just feel so bad for them. So I know we all feel a little lucky, a little spoiled that we had wrestling and then people within it to teach us. So really appreciate you guys reaching out. Dave, thank you so much. It's been really great getting to meet you over the past few weeks, and everyone who's on the call. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, man. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, guys.
We'll see you next weekend.
Yes. That'll be great.
Penn State, right?
Again.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's
Friday night.
Love it. Thanks again, guys. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Wrestling Changed My Life. This episode was presented by QUANT Wrestling. QUANT provides detailed analytics on the great sport of wrestling. Download the QUANT app now in the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. The first 2 weeks are free, but if you use the discount code WCML, you'll get an additional 2 weeks free. That's QUANT, QUANT, available in both the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. QUANT Wrestling, a proud sponsor of Wrestling Changed My Life.